Assalamu alaikum everyone, thank you. It's quite nice to see the hall full. I'm Sanam Saeed and this is Sabyn Javeri, writer of Hijabistan, which we will be letting you hear a podcast that we recorded. Another friend of ours thought we should encourage our South Asian writers to be on a podcast. So we have one story, Coach Annie, on a podcast, and we'll read out The Adulteress for you.
Assalamu alaikum, adab. I'm Sabyn and Sanam, you all already know. Thank you so much for being here. And like Sanam said, we're here today to talk about Hijabistan. We're here to talk about storytelling. We're here to talk about the power of oral storytelling, which is a very rich tradition of South Asia. It predates the written tradition as well. And I think to this date, we still have a very rich tradition of oral storytelling. Sanam has done an amazing job of bringing these stories to life. And I think it would be wonderful if we could start with one of the podcasts that our friend Saima has very passionately and creatively recorded. So, Sanam, why don't we start with that and then we can discuss?
Yeah.
Right. So, presenting Coach Annie.
Love to Hear is supported by Brand and produced by Azad Khayal and couple of good studios. I'm your host Saima and I'm happy to bring you Coach Annie, one of the short stories from the book Hijabistan, written by Sabyn Javeri, an award-winning novelist and short story writer. Coach Annie is a story of a girl pushing her limits and redefining her place in the society. Read by Sanam Saeed. Sanam is best known for her work in Zindagi Gulzar Hai and the movie Cake. Over to Sanam.
Coach Annie. At first, I was a curiosity, a nuance, then a nuisance, an irritation, a problem, and finally a thing of hate. They say when people start to hate you, it's because they are afraid of you, afraid of your power. Well, I was getting plenty of hate. Did that make me powerful? I suppose so. I'd always been the odd one out in our little Yorkshire town, the packy girl with the headscarf and the spots. In that order, believe it or not. It should have been the other way around. The spots came first. Angry red dots that decorated my face like a Christmas tree. My mother made me scrape my oily skin with wire mesh and wash my face with hard soap every day. But that only made it worse. My face became dry and scaly like the skin of a desert lizard. The eczema spread to my scalp and, slowly but surely, my hair began to fall off. I was the only daughter amidst 4 sons, and my mother could not bear the shame. That's when the headscarves came into the picture. One day, she approached me with a beautiful pink cloth and wrapped it around my bald head, tucking the ends under my chin. The look of joy in her eyes was unforgettable. I too felt as if I had finally validated my femininity to her. She made it out to be a religious thing, bragging to our neighbors about how devout her little girl was, and somewhere along the way, I began to believe it too. I took my hijab very seriously, even if not my prayers. I suppose at that point, I just preferred the cloth to a wig. Believe me, wearing a wig is a bit of a challenge when you're just 8. Having a piece of cloth wrapped around my head was a lot easier than juggling a mop of hair when the biggest thrill in life was running senseless in the backyard with my brothers, Mum shouting that we're the devil's lot. No one listened to her, even back then. Sometimes, I wondered if she was invisible. For despite her shrill voice, people had a habit of walking off while she was talking, and she loved to talk. Those days it was about my hijab. She couldn't gloat enough about how we were all going to go to heaven thanks to her virtuous daughter, How proud she was of me for wearing the hijab and embracing God's will of my big sacrifice. I usually stared blankly while she babbled away, wondering how slapping a piece of cloth on one's head could guarantee free entry into the pearly gates, and why she didn't wear one herself if it was indeed so special. To be fair, she tried, but Mum couldn't bring herself to wear one regularly. Though she covered her head loosely with a shawl when she stepped out, too much trouble, she'd say, buying me beautiful silk scarves to tie around my head instead. But I preferred her tea cloths to the fancy embroidered ones she got for me from Bradford. I just couldn't handle the silky material she preferred. It skidded all over. The plain, coarse, skull-hugging hijab suited me, snug and neat along my bony skull, slipping on like a balaklava and staying there. It sure stopped our nosy Pakistani neighbours from speculating what sins my mother had committed for baldness to befall me. I think we all assumed it would be a temporary thing. But my hair never grew back. Instead, the hijab grew on me. It became an extension of me, a part of me. It kept me grounded, reminded me that God was watching out for me. I was no longer just that odd-looking girl with the wrong skin, wrong color, wrong hair. Instead, I was that Muslim girl. People left me alone, and believe me, it suited me just fine. Did it get lonely? Yes, it did. But that was okay because I had 4 younger brothers to take up all my time. I was happy to play football in the yard with them when we weren't all fighting and trying to kill each other. Fast forward to my teen years and I found myself being offered a government grant to go to university to study sports therapy. Part of the deal was that for 6 months prior, I had to work with the community youth with whatever task was assigned to me, be it teaching or coaching or caregiving. My only hesitation was that it meant getting out there and helping strangers, usually troubled ones. It meant interaction. And I was scared. I was used to hiding away, melting into the scenery, avoiding socialization at all costs. Having an overprotective mother helped. My life was just school and home. I rarely went out. I couldn't even remember talking to a stranger. "This is your chance to get an education. Grab it," my brother told me. And not for the first time. I wondered why they were so different from my shy and reticent father whose world, like mine, was the factory and home. "Give it a try," my brothers urged. "People would give an arm and a leg to get a full scholarship." So I went ahead and signed up, waiting for my first assignment. I'd been tossing a ball around in the community center one chilly January morning when one of the bosses stepped out, asking for a volunteer. I watched, curiously, as the suited man said in a high-pitched, anxious voice that he needed someone to coach a team. I should have known by the tremble in his voice that this was no little league. I offered myself, and the sacrificial cow that I was, the gods were satiated. I still don't know if God was trying to help me or kill me. All I know is that He was testing me. First day on the pitch, and I found myself trying to tell a bunch of towering, Geordie lads with learning difficulties that I was there to coach them. There was a fair bit of laughter, and I saw myself through their eyes. A 5 feet 2 inches Asian girl with a headscarf. Not exactly cutting the stereotypical cult figure of a macho coach with a gut slapping his thighs and yelling, "Come on!" The shock was mutual, for I had expected young boys, not 6 feet tall gigantic lads with special needs. But while I hid my fear, they made their feelings crystal clear. They didn't say anything. No, those lads didn't. But on the pitch, the anger and the fury at being told what to do by a wee little lass in a hijab came out. They fell on me, kicked me, pushed me, roughed me up. All part of the game, I can't complain. Someone once told me that part of winning was showing up. So I showed up, day in and day out. My bruises got deeper, my bones cracked some more, one swollen eye stopped opening all the way. I took it on the chin, like a sport. It became a kind of joke, but then I was used to jokes. On me, that is. The joke is on me. Like my headscarf, it was part of me. Chin up, I tell myself and march out into the field, my mother yelling at me that I should forget uni-shuni and go to see a doctor to get my head checked, and that I should get a normal job at the supermarket checkout, like all the other Asian girls my age. Sometimes, even my brothers winced when they saw my injuries. "There are easier ways to kill yourself," my younger brother said to me one day, and he carried me off the field after a particularly grueling match. But I shook my head. "I love sports," I managed to say between the blood oozing from my mouth. "I love the field." The attempts to accidentally yank off the headscarves were many. Though none was successful, I always wondered what they expected to find. The roughest guy in my team was the smallest lad on the pitch, and he was usually the one doing the headlocks. The biggest guy, his brother, usually went for my whistle. Gio and Sasha. They were the simple guys with a black and white view of the world, sure that everything bad had to do with my kind. So sure that sometimes even my own faith shook. It was around then that 7/7 happened. I went home and cried my lashless eyes out. It seemed so senseless. But I guess violence made the world go around. It was like night and day, I often thought. Where there is love, there is hate. And if hate is power, then perhaps this was a struggle between the love of power and the power of love. I would soon find out. 6 weeks down, I was nearly done with my coaching credits when a player tripped me. I broke my ankle. Sadly, it didn't break my spirit. I showed up, crutch and all. Faith can make you do a lot of illogical things, but sometimes it can also give you the strength to push ahead. I showed up, ready for more abuse. But something changed that day. "Man, Annie, there ain't no stopping you, is there?" one of the players said, cracking a smile. I shook my head. Truth was, I didn't know any better. There was nothing else out there for me. Off the field, I was the bald, eczema-ridden Muslim fundo. On the field, I was fire. It fired me up, football. "Why don't you play professional?" the same player asked me later that day. I smiled and pointed to my headscarf. "They don't allow professional football players to wear a hijab." He tugged at it playfully. "It can't mean that much to you. Not worth giving up your dream." My heart did a little jump, and I stepped back. This little tug felt more brutal than all the shoves and kicks the lads had landed. I realized then that my hijab did mean something to me. It wasn't just a cover to hide my scanty hairline. It defined me. It was part of me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror without my hijab. I wore a baseball cap on my head. "Go Arsenal," I shouted. The person in the mirror mimicked me. I didn't know who she was. Last day of coaching, I had a surprise waiting for me. I had been offered a paid position that I could take up along with college. I was sure the team would make a fuss. But the biggest shock was that I found out that the lads wanted me to stay on. Somehow, something had changed. I had been accepted. These big, strong lads who struggled with reading and writing had understood something I could never have expressed in words. Gathering around me in a circle, they told me to go on and take it. And I did. To this day, I'm not sure if it was my coaching that made them change their minds or my stubbornness. But just like that, everything changed. Something healed inside me that day. It was as if all the broken bones had joined together and the scrapes and cuts had healed, as if someone had placed a cold press on a bruise. Later that week, 6 new lads went on to join the team, and I braced myself for a repeat. But the first day the mocking came, it was none other than Sasha and Gio who stood up for me and said, "Leave her alone. She's all right, our coach Annie is." Needless to say, it set the tone. I found myself looking in the mirror again that night, my skull-tight black hijab almost blending into my dark skin, scarred with small cuts and scarlet-hued bruises. This time, I recognized the girl in the mirror for who she really was, and it was a relief. I felt easy. My joints felt loose. I was no longer the spotty Muslim girl in a headscarf. Instead, I was Coach Annie.
That was beautifully read.
Oh, thank you.
Has anyone read the book? Hijabistan. Right. Right.
How many stories are there in there again?
I don't know.
8?
I think maybe 12.
12?
Yeah.
They're about 10 minutes long each, all of them, but they're really quite fascinating, and the common theme with the hijab and what it means to a lot of people and how it's used differently, I think you're the best person to.
That's very well put, actually. I think in our times, hijab has become such a controversial topic, but I thought it would be interesting to look at hijab as a metaphor, not just as a physical garment, but as a kind of a veil, divide between men and women, between women and women, between the outer world and the inner world, between public spaces and private spaces. So it's more of a metaphorical approach towards what it is that we hide and what it is that we show people. Sometimes it's through our clothes, but there's a lot more behind it. And I think as an actor, you probably know about that too, right? We were talking a little bit about this whole idea of performance, about the stories that we tell people and the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we don't want anyone to know. What were your thoughts about the stories?
On Coach Annie, just exactly how she needed the reason behind why they start the hijab, but I mean the focus is not too much on the hijab. It's I, as an actor, like acting because I'm not confident in real life, believe it or not. I like to hide behind my characters and be angry and express stronger emotions that I don't express in real life through characters. And for some girls, it's through sports or it's singing or it's writing. I mean, I'm sure you express a lot of your deeper thoughts and feelings and opinions through your writing. And I don't think you just have to be an artist to do that. I think everyone, any job you have, a teacher takes on the responsibility and hides a lot of her stuff behind that responsibility or that role, or as a mother, as a wife, and a lot of the stories, that's what you'll see, is how everyone takes on a different character to just go through life. And we forget, as Sabyn says in another story, that these are the choices we made. You could have been anything you wanted, but because of circumstantial situations or life, you take on these roles, and it's important to always connect with yourself and who you are. And I think that's where the hijab comes in, because it allows you to, in your alone time, when it's off, connect with who you are, and when you put it back on, then you're facing the world as another character.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there are various ways we express each other, and sometimes, it is through clothes as well. But obviously, at times there's a deeper meaning behind it. But also the choices we make. And the word choices makes me think that as a writer, there are certain sensibilities I have which make me write about the subjects that I want to write about. Something that's really close to my heart is the way women tell their stories. It's very important for me to really try and tell a story which tries to find out where women find their strength from. You know, it may not necessarily be about a strong person, but the fact that they are trying to draw some strength from whatever circumstances that they are in. That's something I'm very passionate about. I'm interested to know, how do you make the choices that you make? Because you're also known for your empowered, strong female characters.
Well, like the topic of this discussion was storytelling and the importance of storytelling, whether you're writing it, whether you're performing it, or whether you're part of the audience also. It takes a listener also to be part of the storytelling. I was lucky to get a lot of the roles that I got. I think it's my appearance and the role that society thinks I have taken on. They assume it's a outspoken, confident, headstrong, muphat girl, but I'm really not. I think, but that's the facade. And so I was given those characters of the not so attractive, but the strong, opinionated girl who breaks stereotypes and kind of paves the way for others. And I think I was really fortunate to be able to have gotten those opportunities, because the reaction that I've gotten from some of the work I've done is quite inspirational, it's quite humbling. Storytelling changes lives. I mean, I love cinema because it has such a huge impact. It changes mindsets, it becomes a part of culture. Our stories define who we are and become a part of our culture. And that does create history, whether some people think so or not. And the choices I make are from I have to say, from the reaction that I get from people. I think that has seriously affected the rest of the choices that I made after having landed some great work.
No, and I think it does have a lot of impact. I think we talked about this, how the response to Zindagi Gulzar Hai was enormous. You know, people found real strength in the character of this young girl who's drawing her strength from just carrying on, is career-oriented, has seen her mother go through a very tough life, is understanding of the fact that the mother wants to see her happily married, but, you know, finds a sort of a middle ground to conform to those traditional expectations, yet be financially and emotionally independent, which I think was fabulous. But do you feel that there aren't too many of those kind of, you know, storytelling narratives?
Of course, there's more entertainment-based things, and there's fewer stories that have these kind of inspirational, motivating messages. But you need all kinds of stories. Sometimes people don't want a lesson, I think. Sometimes people don't want to see a reflection of their own lives. They just want to be entertained, and they just want a different type of story. Soap operas was so huge. I think we all grew up with our parents, mothers, particularly the ladies, watching mindless, senseless soap operas, but that in its own way assisted them. It kind of took them away from their mundane lives. It kind of created this fantasy, this kind of excitement, this just something to forget about their troubles or their woes or their boring, mundane routine that they get stuck in. And I think stories like that are... so you need all kinds of stories. You need those ones with a message, and you need entertainment. But the beauty of storytelling is how you see a little bit of yourself in every story that you pick up. And that is important for us to learn more about ourselves, to learn about each other, and to develop a sense of empathy and respect for everyone's journey. For me, that's the beauty of storytelling, I think, is to...
No, absolutely. And I think it is a journey, because I think we are moving away from those binaries. You know, storytelling, whether it's in novels or whether it's in dramas or films, there is this, or there was this trend of women being defined according to binaries, you know,
Yes.
saints or sinners. It's always the Gori Chutti, Sidi Sadi, or the Savli and confident and outspoken, you know,
Yeah.
two spectrums. उसके बारे में क्या ख्याल है आपका?
I think वो हम South Asians में एक बीमारी है कि we just have to, it's just a bimari we have. I don't think we're open-minded enough to see beyond that. You know, you still have looking for a fair wife in the newspapers, a description for a wife, or people are still talking about बहुत प्यारी है, बहुत गोरी है, and thinking of the children के बच्चे भी गोरे होंगे और उनके आंखें हल्के होंगे, and so there are all these ingrained fixed stereotypes. But I think with exposure and writers breaking stereotypes, even in our dramas now, those stereotypes are being broken. And in the very recent one, you know, an unmarried woman is living with a man. And that was huge. And you can have all kinds of debates can arise from that, but at least it starts the conversation. The woman is not just the Sati Savitri, you know, a woman can also, she obviously has flaws, but she can also stray from her path. And so these fixed ideas that the woman can't, as some of the writers or men or people believe that, you know, the man has the power, a woman has the power to refuse certain temptations. उसकी तरबियत में ही है, उसकी नेचर में है कि वो मना कर सकती है, लेकिन मर्द नहीं कर सकता, तो उसको माफ़ कर दो. लेकिन अगर औरत भटक गई तो she's a fallen woman. And these things desperately need to change, these ideas. We're human beings, we have emotions, we have frustrations, and what is right and what is wrong is wrong, but to kind of say it like that is disturbing. But our stories, I'm sure that kind of story inspired another writer to tell another side, and so the cycle keeps going, and there's always room for growth and broadening our horizons and our perspectives.
Yeah, ये मुझे काफ़ी funny लगता है कि you know, exactly what you said, you know, these expectations we have from certain gender roles, and often, you know, when we hear about, I remember I was a teenager, I think, and I heard my this woman from my neighborhood tell my mother कि आपको पता है फलाने की मिसेस जो है वो किसी के साथ भाग गई, and they were so shocked, you know, and I remember thinking, but they weren't so shocked when so-and-so left his wife for someone else, but because we have these morals attached to women, we find it very strange that a woman can cheat, you know, or a woman can betray, or a woman could be corrupt. Similarly, you know, even with good qualities like ambition, we find that very strange also when associated with women. If we say a man is ambitious, it's amazing, but you don't want to marry a girl who's ambitious.
Because uska dhyan
yeah, exactly.
हट जाएगा घर से.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have tried to do in Hijabistan is that I've tried to find stories of women who don't fall into this saint or sinner category, you know, who are human, who are grey. And I think you also, in your characters, find that greyness. And I think that's what makes your roles relatable, why people are able to connect, you know. And I think whatever the story, you know, we can find a way to tell it so that people are able to connect to it emotionally. Because I think we've all at some point or the other experienced this, you know, where all these expectations from us, which there comes a point where you start wanting to challenge those. For me, it was when I was growing up and noticing all these different expectations from men and women, and I started reading about these really powerful women Urdu writers like Rashid Jahan and Isma Chugtai, who were sort of telling their own stories, you know, not falling into the narrative which was expected of them. Where do you find your strength from? And, you know, I mean, I don't know if you're a feminist or not, but what's your story?
What's my story in terms of picking up the stories that I pick up, or just generally?
No, just believing.
Well, I come from my mother was, she was the youngest of 4 siblings. She had 3 older brothers from a very conservative Memon family. She married at 30, which is very late for her community. She married a Punjabi, so someone outside of the Memon community. So I've just seen my mother constantly fight for her rights in a respectable manner with her parents, but I think I've grown up in a very female-empowered household where my father was never a bichara and dominated by a strong woman, but there was always a really perfect balance, and I really appreciate my parents for showing me that, and I'm very fortunate to have seen what a good union looks like, where mutual respect. My father was the one who would wake up in the morning, my mother was a teacher, he would pack our breakfast. He would wake us all up. He was a morning person. He'd pack our breakfast and pack us off to school. When my mother would come back, she'd make sure our lunch, but she'd also make sure ke sartaj ka bhi khana. You know, it's that balance. You can be an ambitious working woman, but the confusion comes in when she becomes not too ambitious, but when she doesn't know how to balance. It is tough for the woman, tougher, because she does have to pay attention to the children and her husband and the family needs, as well as balance her work life. And I saw my mother do that. And I think that's what I've also learned through work. I've learned through the women I've worked with, that balance is really important. But to definitely pursue your goals, your dreams, be confident, and you know what is right and what is wrong, and not to give in to what people say or judgment or opinion, because everyone will have a judgment, everyone will have an opinion. You can't allow that to shape you. And that comes with age, I think. When I was younger, I was more susceptible to people's opinions. In fact, after Zindagi Gulzare, I had become kashaf. I wouldn't wear sleeveless anymore. I couldn't be seen doing anything that kashaf wouldn't do, and it became a little heavy sometimes. It took me 3 years, I think, to break that, because she'd become such an iconic role model for so many young girls that I crumbled under that pressure. It was exciting, and it was really a great honor to be looked up at like that, but I had to find my way. So yes, I'm a feminist when it comes to my characters, when it comes to the way my mother raised us, and the way I'd like to be viewed at by young girls who want inspiration or confidence to kind of go ahead and chase their dreams and make way for themselves freely.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting, the things you talked about, balance and also separating the art from the artist. You know, I also grew up watching my mother balance this, her professional life with her personal life. She was also in education, actually, and she would, go to work, she would come back, she would, serve us food, help us with our homework and everything. And I would see my father come home, and he would just turn on the TV, And I grew up thinking that there's something very wrong here. They're just absolutely unreal expectations again from women. And I decided, I also actually, my father is also a Gujarati Mehman, and I was actually married off very young, at 21. But somehow I decided that I am not going to balance. I'm going to expect balance from my husband. And, I think men, if given the chance, can also live up to expectations.
Of course, it's bad habit that bachpan se, I think, yeah.
And when my son was born, I thought, we're always telling women, bring her up, this way, teach her to be a feminist, teach her to stand up for her rights. And I would, when I was bringing up my son, I would tell him, you are the one who needs to learn to do housework. You're the one who needs to learn how to cook. Because I think we need to now start educating our men.
Of course.
Yeah, and like you said, your father used to help pack the lunches and everything. I think that's a perfect balance, and that's what is empowering for our younger generation to see also. What you said about, Kashaf sort of becoming your embodiment, I think that's so fabulous, because it's so hard to separate your art from the actor inside you. Not only for us, well, obviously for the audience, but also for us, I often get this about my book, that आपने हिजाबिस्तान कैसे लिखी, आप तो हिजाब नहीं पहनती. This idea of lived experience, that only someone who actually has experienced something can tell the story. So did you feel that people were expecting you to be Kashaf?
No, I think they were very shocked that this burger bachi was playing such a down-to-earth a middle class background girl who just kind of embodied that. I think they were very shocked to see that my Urdu is actually terrible when it's spoken. My Muzakkar Muannas is all off. And I dress differently or carry myself differently, but I didn't think they were expecting that. But it's nice as a writer, as an actor, anyone to shock people or to do the unexpected. I think that's always what is.
Speaking of unexpected, should we
Yes.
do another reading?
Yeah.
Okay. So now all you lucky people get to hear Sanam read live.
I better keep a live audience entertained. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about the other stories, the general gist, because a lot of people haven't read. The common theme and what drove you to write these stories.
Oh, I love the way you summed it up actually when you were describing it. But yeah, so the book is when... Okay, I had this idea. I was working on a postdoc and I was doing some research about my PhD thesis. Also, I was looking at Muslim women leaders. For this book, it didn't start out like I didn't think, oh, I'm going to write a book of short stories about the hijab. I was doing ethnographic research about. Well, basically, I wanted to find stories of women who wore the hijab and felt very empowered by it. There was a lot of research coming out, Leela Buloa, then lots of people were writing about Muslim women and how they were making this conscious choice to wear the hijab and how it was not oppressive as it has been presented by a lot of Western feminists, but could also be enabling. I wanted to look at that. I wanted to meet women who wore the hijab and were, truck drivers or were basically doing it out of choice and living a good life and, not falling into that trope of submissive or oppressed.
But there's a lot of explicit stuff in this book also. So how was that received? I'm sure there was a lot of, you were probably shunned for talking about a woman's sexuality at the same time. She's covering her head also, so there's that religious angle there, and then there's this very liberal angle. How was that received, or what did you think when writing these two contradictory, well, they're not contradictory, they're real life situations. What did you...
Yeah, I think the question says it all. That's a very loaded question. But yes, when I started researching, when I started talking to people, I actually realized that it wasn't so black and white. It wasn't so simple because we have to really examine the idea of choice, Choice is not always conscious. It's not always like either completely oppressive or completely enabling. Some women were wearing it. A lot of students I spoke to, a lot of university students I spoke to said that, it's just convenient because it's not that we don't get harassed on public transport, but we get less harassed if we are. Others who I spoke to said that, if we are, dressed in a certain way, if we're wearing the hijab and the abaya, people actually think they can get away with stuff. They actually try to take advantage because they think, oh, ye to kuch nahi kahegi, compared to someone who's, wearing jeans or something. So there were all kinds of views, there wasn't just one simple narrative. I met sex workers who wear the hijab, because they want to be presented, they want to present themselves a certain way because their lives are so separate, their work lives are so segregated from their professional lives. And I realized that the hijab wasn't just a physical garment. It wasn't a piece of cloth. The hijab was deeper than that. The hijab was actually inside us. It was this veil between our body and our desires, between our hearts and our minds. So the book became more and more metaphorical. Eventually, I decided to just take inspiration from my research and write these fictionalized, dramatized stories. The reaction to that was also extreme. Some people really liked the book. Some people thought it was very creative, very insightful, very real, human. Some people were absolutely shocked. Some people were offended because they don't want to associate something which is associated with purity with something which is gray. You know, I have also looked at women's sexuality in this book. I'm not the first writer to do it. Isma Chugtai was put on trial for doing that back in the 1930s. But I don't know why we are so shy to talk about these things, because I think, like you said, you know, sometimes someone puts a drama out there, someone writes a story, creates a film.
Because it's all hush-hush. The point is, the conversation needs to happen. And the more there's open dialogue, then all these things will come to light and discussed more, and there'll be less of a taboo.
Yeah, become more
associated.
normalized.
Yeah.
You know. So
do you want to give a little intro to the Adulteress?
Yeah, sure. So this story, The Adulteress, is about... actually, Sanam, you describe it so well. Why don't you do it? Yeah. You know, okay, Sanam was saying earlier on that I asked her what she thought of the story, and she was saying that for her it was about choices.
Right. It was, well, before, I guess, the discussion when we have the question and answer session. When Sabyn asked me what I felt when I read this story, I felt this story was really a mirror to a lot of women in particular, and men, depending on how you see it. But it's a woman, a mother, a housewife, and this secret, passionate desire that she's kind of fighting internally, and the choices she has to make to be a good woman, or a woman who makes wrong choices, or you can see it as you like. So this is called The Adulteress. She thought of him as she folded the clothes. She thought of him as she put them away. She thought of him as she walked on autopilot to the kitchen. She thought of him as she opened the fridge and pulled out the okra. Without washing the vegetables, she began to chop mechanically, the sharp green needle-like tips reminding her of his beak-shaped nose. That was today. Halfway through the chopping, she put down the knife. She seemed to be straining to hear something. Abruptly, she got up and walked towards the open door of the balcony. Parde mein rehne do, parda na uthao. The words from an old film song drifted up towards her, and she inhaled them, slowly, as if they were the aroma of a rich home brew. She found her heart slowing down. Her palms felt cold, and she had to lean against the metal railing to steady herself. She remembered watching the film with her parents when she was a little girl. VCRs were a new thing in those days, obsolete as they are now. And she smiled at the thought of trying to explain to her children what they were. For a moment, and just a moment, the thought distracted her. The shrill ringing of the phone broke into her thoughts, and she looked guiltily at her mobile writhing on the table. For some inexplicable reason, its vibration reminded her of the dances in the films of that era. Helen, she whispered softly, smiling and shaking her head at the memory of the cabaret dancer, jerking her body in impossibly swift movements at breakneck speed. Everything was so black and white in those days, she thought. The roles of the good girl and the bad girl clearly defined, the heroine and the vamp, never mixed. That was then. The phone stopped ringing, and the stillness of the silence pressed upon her now. The radio downstairs had been switched off, and she heard the banging of a door as if someone had left the house. She was alone now, alone with her thoughts. A tangible panic gripped her throat as if trying to trap her. 1,000 fingers clutching her neck and jaw. The sun seemed brighter, the wind harsher. She closed her eyes, and a face appeared behind the closed lids. It doubled into faces. Faces which were looking at her with great trust. "You are not Helen," they assured her. And she opened her eyes and started to laugh. But the laughter provided little relief. The restlessness within her was growing with as much thrust and power as that of a magical beanstalk. She wanted to do something. But what? As if to curb some mysterious urge, she pushed a flower pot off the balcony edge. Immediately she took a step back, waiting for the sound of a crash. She waited for a loud thud, perhaps a scream, a yelp, a reproach. When none came, She leaned forward and saw that the plant had fallen on the clean white sheets of her ground floor neighbor, which she had hung out to dry. The now soiled sheets had cushioned the fall and fluttered up at her as if to say a half-hearted hello. She stepped back again, placing a hand on her forehead as if to check her own temperature. This was unlike her. Since when had she become so destructive? And with a deep frown, she wondered, so wasteful? This was now. She waited for her neighbor to shout, but no sound traveled up, and she exhaled, slowly, deeply. It was a slippery feeling, she thought, the relief of getting away with something. She looked up at the white hot sun, which looked like a hole burned in a blue cloth by some careless god, and touched her throat, her neck. Finally, her fingers rested on the space between her breasts. She pressed the hard bit, the bone or the cage or whatever it was that kept her heart from escaping. Assured by the beating drums inside her, she allowed herself to think back to him. It came to her in little flashes, like swatches of color, like sudden sparks from dying embers. The memory of being with another man was something her mind seemed to block and obsess over at the same time. For a moment, she was reminded of the colored chalk drawings she would draw on the sidewalk when she was a little girl, and how each morning the sweeper would come and wash them away with a bucket of water. What surprised her was how nothing had changed. Her daily routine, her children's demands, her husband's indifference, everything around her remained the same. Except her. She turned away from the light and the wide open sky before her and headed back to her dark, airless kitchen. It was a space she knew well. In the familiar arena of her domain, she inhaled the sense of peeled garlic, the nauseating stench of chopped onions, and the suffocating smell of raw ginger. She allowed herself to wonder, if only for a second, how it had happened. Neither had expected it to happen. She, a mother of 3, and he, a divorcee, rebuilding the foundations of his life, cherishing his newfound freedom, wearing his heart on his sleeve. Perhaps that is what they both had in common. These two completely unlikely beings, a few moments of escape. Neither felt they were ready to let go of their precious, free-floating state they found themselves in. Perhaps they wanted to hold on just a little bit longer. Now, back in the kitchen as she chopped the okra, she felt certain that it was the man who had made the first move. She put the knife aside for a second and leaned back against the counter. Had she given him any sign at all? No, she decided. She hadn't even imagined the possibility, never thought of herself as someone who cheated. But could this be called infidelity? Infidelity. She tried out the word on her tongue. Infidel, she said, looking guiltily out the door towards the Arabic verses embroidered into the wall hanging. Was she an infidel? She wondered, pulling her dupatta close to her skin. But, try as she might, she couldn't feel the guilt. Instead, all she felt was a strange kind of bewilderment. Surprised that something so extraordinary could happen to someone as ordinary as her, all she knew was that night she had felt like a jug being emptied, a vessel that had poured out everything that was inside. But afterwards, she didn't feel hollowed out. Instead, she felt fulfilled, content, as if she had gained something. Or perhaps, she frowned. Perhaps it was the weight of the secret she carried within her body. For a second, she wondered what would happen if her husband or her children found out. She traced the outline of the garlic on her chopping board, Adulteress. She wrote, arranging the pods in a trail of letters, adultery, adult, idol, idolatry, adultery. Except that there was no betrayal. She had made it all up. Yes, she nodded. It was the best thing It was best to think this a product of her imagination, to pen it down and preserve it in her memory forever as fiction. A cry escaped her lips as she realized she had cut herself with the knife's edge. A strange feeling of foreboding washed over her, a shudder, as if she had seen death's angel. She felt herself shiver violently as a fat drop of blood landed on the cutting board, its scarlet hue disappearing into the wood almost immediately. A few seconds later, it was as if it had never happened. Her skin, she noticed, was already beginning to heal. It was then she realized that it didn't matter what stories they told other people. It was the stories we tell our own selves that mattered. Addressing the limp okra that lay split open like ancient soldiers defeated on a battlefield, she said, "We are all made up of stories. The stories we tell others, the stories we tell ourselves, and most importantly, the stories we hide deep inside." Cocking her head to one side, she waited for the lifeless vegetables to respond. It occurred to her that there was a reason why invalids were addressed as vegetables. Enough, she said to herself, as if she willed her thoughts to focus. Her husband was a good man, she told herself, as she went back to the thuk-thuk of the chopping board, bashing the garlic this time. She lifted one pale crescent and held it close to her nose. The strong odor wafted to her nostrils, and she thought back to the other man's scent. She had sniffed his armpits like a dog, like a small bitch sniffing her master, trying to memorize his smell, encapsulate it. Perhaps to enhance her senses when once again the monotony of life got too much. A wave of nausea washed over her. How could she? Her jaw tightened and she felt her limbs stiffen. Why wouldn't she? Why shouldn't she? Now, as she chopped the onions, always at last, as they made her cry, she let the anger flow through her, the rage when it had come and surprised her, for she was a gentlewoman, not easily irked, though there was much that moved her. She'd always cherished that delusional quality of hers, for she lived as if there was some dream sequence. Nothing mattered much in her scheme of things. A beautiful jewel that she couldn't have, a perfect home, or even the love she expected from her husband. Long ago, she had learned not to expect, for expectations were like promises made to be broken. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanam. You read beautifully.
But thank you. You must get the book to read the rest of what her journey is.
Well, I'm
really
sure
oh wow, time flew.
I'm sure you've made everyone curious now as to know what happens next.
Yeah.
They'll have to get the book and hear the podcast as well. But I think we have 7 to 8 minutes left. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to take. Yes?
I just want to say to you, first of all, many, many thanks. All power to both of you.
Thank you.
But I'd like to say to both of you, you're role models and mentors for the future generations of Pakistani women. I'd like to ask you your thoughts on the Azadi, the Aurat March, on 8th March, and perhaps you could share a little bit about the audience and your roles in the Aurat March, on 8th March.
Do you want to go first? Or?
I hate to say I'm not here on the 8th of March, but I do say, it's amazing how last year's Aurat March really riled people up and got all kinds of emotions bubbling and brewing, and whether they think women are crazy, पागल हो गई औरतें, अपने आप को क्या समझती हैं, क्या slogans है, ये कुछ कहना है, इससे तब्दीली आएगी, इसी से ही तब्दीली आएगी, where people, the focus went on the really brazen slogans and completely moved away from the point of the march. But that's what men do too. That's what human beings do. They kind of get distracted. They get passionate about things. They get riled up. They get unreasonable because anger and frustration and suppression can drive you to say and do all kinds of things. And so more power to those women who really put themselves out there and pave the way for other women and other young girls. And I think these movements are obviously very important for our future well-being, our future generation, and for a better understanding of what the women are really fighting for and what their message is. Thank you.
I think well put. And yeah, I just wonder, last year when the march was being organized, and I was working in a university in Karachi at that point, and we were encouraging all our students to go and participate. And it was fascinating that a lot of girl students said, road pe jana hoga. And it made me think, we are 50% of the population and we are not allowed to walk on our own streets. Women don't have access to public spaces in Pakistan, especially in Karachi. You can't, if you're a man, you can just open the door, walk out. But if you're a woman, you can't do that.
You can do that. You have to do that. You have to do that. I think that's also a thought that stops you. You can open that door and walk out, get a group of girls if that makes you feel safer, but I don't think anyone is going to stop a woman from going out. It's a fear, I think, more than...
Yeah, and one of the things for me that Aurat March did was it tried to normalize that. It tried to normalize the fact that, yes, women can also go walk on the street, march on the street. I'm just sad that it has to be a march, I'm sad that why can't we just go walk out on the road. I was sad that it was a shock for my students. And yeah, you're right. We have to take the first step. Yes, it is daunting. It's intimidating. When I first started walking from my house to the British Council, I used to wonder, why is everyone staring at me like I'm some lunatic walking alone on the street? The rickshawalas, motorbikes would slow down and they'd constantly be, "Aap theek hai? Kya kuch ho gaya hai, baji?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm just walking." Yeah, I'm talking about Karachi. Yeah.
I feel safer in Karachi than Lahore. They're used to it.
My first visit ever to Karachi.
That was a different time. My mother used to say the same. She used to say, I used to go to the university alone from society, from PCHS. But I think we have the 80s to thank.
Yes. Yes.
No, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's also the forced Islamization. I think it's the forced politics of a certain era also which has left a legacy. I feel.
It's also young ladies out here. You have to, and this my mother taught me, you have to walk with an aura, unfortunately, because, no offense, gentlemen, but they are like animals. The less educated they are animals. So you're walking out in a zoo, and when you walk through wild animals, you don't nonchalantly stroll, bilkuli apne, you're not in La La Land. You've got to be focused, you've got to be aware, and you have to walk with this aura. You touch me, I'll kill you. And you have to walk with your elbows slightly out, because they are badtameez here. They'll make sure they grind their shoulders into your chest. They'll make sure their hand very carelessly brushes your behind. So you have to walk with this aura. And I used to think wearing loose shirts and my brother's clothes and really hunching, caving my chest in and walking like this would make me less attractive. But I was wrong. That makes you more vulnerable and an easier target. So don't think that your libas or your posture like that. It's the mental state and the aura that you emit, honestly. So I can go in a bazaar now anywhere. My mother, my sister, the women in my family know how to go out without being annoying, shovey women, but just walking very comfortably, confidently. And my cousins who come from abroad, Bichari went to Zeda Market the other day, and when we came home, she told us she was harassed 3 times. 1 man pressed himself completely against her body, and 2 men brushed her. And I said, oh my God, I totally forgot that I have to train you how to walk.
Yeah.
She was worried about her wallet and her bag and her phone, but you have to worry about your body. So as you were saying, you can walk out, you just have to know how to walk out. I think time's up, but if anyone is itching to have, yes, please.
Its basis is supposed to be in the Quran, although paradoxically it's never been clearly sort of elucidated in the Quran, the religious basis for it. So, but now we see in the West that girls who do wear the hijab, they face so many social problems. You know, some are even attacked for wearing the hijab. So, I mean, I appreciate you wrote this book about the hijab, but there is a big downside to it. And I think that if we try and explore whether there is real religious sanctity behind it, that may be a way for us to proceed, in terms of, because the use of the hijab in Muslim countries has become like, to solve own minor social issues, like is in this chapter, someone's bald, so they're covering their head, or someone wants to give the appearance of being empowering and not sort of, but at the same time meek, that she gets more freedom.
Because we don't have much time, so I'll jump in. I think I've got the gist of it. I think there is a lot of scholarship on the religious basis of the hijab. There's a lot of research in academia, in theology as well. The basis of hijab was cultural as well as religious, and it was something not to draw attention to yourself, right? But obviously, if you are wearing a hijab in a Western country where there aren't too many people, then you are actually, yes, drawing a lot more attention to yourself. So that's the religious research that I've come across. Other than that, my book is not about the hijab. My book is trying to say that the hijab is not just a physical garment. There are other ways that we protect ourselves. There are other things that we hide. It can also be a veil between your desires, between your mind and your body, between you and society. So it's a more metaphorical approach, and I think we do need to start thinking about things like hijab. We need to reimagine. We can't be stuck in a singular identity. I don't believe in binaries. I don't think it can be either completely oppressive or completely empowering. And I think by starting conversations about it, having debates, trying to normalize it, I think we're starting to do that. So hopefully.
There's natural organic hijab as well. And that happens when you gain weight. And then extra layers of blubber protect you so well.
I don't know why we have to... Well, I don't know why we have to desexualize our women, but I don't know why we have to desexualize our women to stop taking them seriously. Why do we have to become either, a certain age, or, we can't be attractive and only then we become desexualized? Why can't we just be, men, we don't think of them as all the time as sexual beings who are out there to tempt us. Why are women just these seen as temptress or someone who's just not too attractive to me? So, well, the book is out there, so hopefully you'll get your copy. Also, the podcast is going to be out soon.
Yeah.
Do you know the name of the podcast?
Saima mentioned it, but I forgot.
Well, you'll be hearing more about it.
I'll tweet about it.
Yes. I will tweet about it, yes. So thank you so much, Sanam, and thank you to this wonderful audience.
Thank you, Sabyn. Thank you.